And there's been a big sort of a revolution going on in the vegan pet food world just in the last few years. There's been quite a very rapid rate of growth of new products and brands coming to market and companies coming into the space. The products are becoming available.
Well, welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast. We're here with Dr. Knight, who is an expert in vegan foods for dogs. And we're talking about, nutrition and the things that are best fit for our pets. So I just wanted to ask Dr. Knight if you'd introduce yourself and tell us how you got into this area of interest that you have now.
Sure. I finished vet school and worked in small animal practice treating dogs and cats for nearly a decade before going into academia. I did a couple of PhDs when I was in academia. One of them, the most recent one I just finished, was on vegan pet food. I've been really interested in vegan pet food because we already know that vegan diets confer enormous environmental benefits and also animal welfare benefits as well, providing that they're nutritionally sound. And there's been a big sort of a revolution going on in the vegan pet food world just in the last few years. There's been quite a very rapid rate of growth of new products and brands coming to market and companies coming into the space. The products are becoming available. I wanted to do research to find out what would the health outcomes be for dogs that were being maintained on these diets. There have been a lot of studies in that area that have come out just very recently, some of them by myself, some of them by others. And also, what would the behavioural implications and especially the environmental implications be of using vegan pet food compared to meat-based pet food? So I've been involved in a multi-year research project to examine these sorts of issues. We've had a series of really exciting studies published open access in scientific journals recently, and more research is forthcoming in this area. It's become sort of such a big and interesting area for me that I now do this full time. Actually, I've still affiliated with two universities, University of Winchester in the United Kingdom, where I established a Centre for Animal Welfare in 2015, and also Griffith University in Australia, where I did my first PhD.
84 million times a day, pets eat meals with ingredients from Trow Nutrition. We bring together the science of ingredients, nutrition, and blending to unleash possibilities for pet food brands. Premixes are just the start. Turn to Trow for higher inclusion ingredients too, like proteins and carbohydrates, and highly sensitive ingredients like probiotics. With our palatants and base blends, you can feel confident about what comes in our bags and goes in yours. Learn more at TrowNutritionPets.com.
That's very interesting. Now, when I've been looking at your research a little bit, just as I prepared for our chat today, and it seemed like you were mostly with dog foods. Have you done vegan pet with cat foods as well?
Yes, we published it was the largest study so far of health outcomes in cats maintained on vegan diets just last year, actually. And it was very exciting. After controlling for differences in dietary groups in age, sex, neutering status, and location, we wanted to do location in case some vegan cats might have been going outdoors and hunting. So after controlling for all of those factors, we found that the cats who had vegan diets, there was a strong tendency for them to have better health outcomes across all of the general indicators of health that we examined. So on the basis of that, we concluded that providing those diets are formulated to be nutritionally sound with supplementation, they are healthier diets for cats to be maintained on than traditional meat-based pet foods, actually, which is very exciting because it's contrary to what conventional wisdom has historically been, which is that cats need to be fed meat.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And this shows that the opposite is true.
I think you're hitting on something of general interest there for nutritionists, because we sort of have as a foundation, I wonder if you'd agree with it, as a foundational principle that the ingredients supply nutrients, and the nutrients are what are provided to benefit the pet, so that in fact an amino acid from from rice protein would not have a greater value to a cat than an amino acid from chicken, because it's an amino acid, it's lysine or tryptophan or threonine or whatever. Is that kind of the foundation of your understanding of this food?
Yeah, that's absolutely seems to be the foundation also of a lot of misunderstanding in this field. People very commonly feel that cats need to be fed meat, and that's because they misunderstand that cats cats don't need any particular ingredient. They need
Yeah.
a certain set of nutrients which are specific to cats, and dogs have a different set. People have a different set. These are nutrients that have to be supplied in the diet, and um, meat-based cat food and dog food includes meat, but also lots of supplemental nutrients that are added in as well to ensure those diets are nutritionally sound. So, providing that plant-based or vegan diets also have all the necessary nutrients supplemented into them, it stands to reason that you would expect health outcomes to be, broadly
Mhm.
speaking, just as good. The other factors that are important are that the diet is palatable enough so the animals will be happy to consume it, and that the ingredients are adequately digestible and bioavailable so that they can be taken up by the body, circulate in the bloodstream, and reach the cells and pass through the cell membranes. So, the information that I've seen from various studies in this area indicates that digestibility of nothing is 100%, but the plant based ingredients seem to be comparable actually to the animal based ingredients. Sometimes they're slightly less, sometimes they're actually a little bit superior.
Yes.
So there doesn't seem to be a problem with the nutrients reaching the cells inside the body and providing you supply all the nutrients needed in the diet. Logically, you should expect that health outcomes to be as good or better.
Yeah. In fact, I published one of those. You may you didn't reference it, I think, but we looked at a large number of animal and plant-based proteins in dog and cat digestibility studies, and found that specifically in cats, and surprisingly, perhaps because of the ingredients we were using, they were slightly better at digesting the proteins that were in plant-based ingredients than they were in the animal-based. And again, you want that food, right? So in general, what you want is the ingredients to provide nutrients, and in order to get the nutrients, the pet has to digest them. So we want to feed the gut and the microbes in the gut, but in general, we're feeding the whole organism, including those microbes. We want it to be digested pretty much well to get those nutrients to the pet. So that's kind of aligned with mine too. But I want to talk a little bit about supplementation. You were speaking of okay, we know these nutrients the cats need, uh, say arachidonic acid. I found that EPA and DHA, these very long chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, are beneficial for dogs and cats. Carnitine, I think, another nutrient that comes in animal ingredients. So, are you supplementing these? And how, if you want, I'm so ignorant of this. If you want a true vegan diet, you have no animal base at all, right? So they're coming completely independent of animal sources. How do you get those nutrients of interest independent of that source?
Absolutely. So the companies that are producing these diets supplement with, I think, quite a wide range of nutrients. Some of the ones that you've mentioned and other ones as well. And those are added into vegan pet foods, but also added into meat based pet foods quite often as well, because sometimes the naturally occurring nutrients might be heavily degraded by the temperatures, pressures, and chemical treatments involved in processing of pet food. And this would be less likely to affect, say minerals, but it would be more likely to affect vulnerable or fragile nutrients such as amino acids or perhaps some vitamins as well.
Always worry about fatty acids coming through too.
Exactly. So the companies add these in after processing is completed to ensure that the final product is nutritionally sound. And exactly the same thing goes on with vegan pet foods as well. My areas of studies have been looking at what are the health outcomes of in populations of animals maintained on these different diets. That's where a lot of my expertise is. I'm not involved in the formulation of these diets.
But I want to talk to you about, how do we do that? Like, in a normal study, I think I have this broad spectrum of experimental units, if you will, and I say, okay, I'm going to randomly assign, treatments, and then I'll do that analysis. But in these types of analysis, pretty often you're going out and saying, what is your experience feeding this pet food? And they've already assigned. So how do you separate that? You talked about that, and I think that'd be very interesting for the audience, to know how do you come up with an independent, here's my effect of food, independent of maybe I really love my pet and I have this desire for my pet that influences both my food, my food choice and my outcome.
Yeah. The studies that I've done have looked at really large numbers of pet guardians. So we published a study looking at health outcomes in more than 2,500 dogs last year, for example, and another very large one in cats. It's prohibitively expensive, given the research funding that's been available, to conduct prospective randomized controlled trials, which is where you randomly select animal subjects and you assign them to, for example, a meat-based or a vegan diet, and then you study the outcomes. So for multiple reasons, the studies that I've done have looked at surveying large numbers of pet guardians and asking, as you say, what their experience has been. Now, it's true that there will be a group of pet guardians who might be strongly committed to feeding meat. We include many raw meat feeding pet guardians, and they often have quite strong attachments to the notion that feeding meat is really important. And it's also true that some of the guardians feeding vegan diets may have similar conscious or unconscious biases about expecting their animals to do particularly well on the diets that they're choosing. So we've done our best to try to minimise the effects of any conscious or unconscious bias effects in our studies through multiple measures that we've included in the studies. And one of those, for example, is to ask questions about health outcomes prior to any questions about diet, in case a person that's just answered a question confirming they've chosen an unconventional diet might subconsciously downplay any perceived health problems in the next question that they're answering. But more important, I think, than any steps we've taken is another forthcoming study that I have seen recently, which exists as a preprint on an internet server where forthcoming scientific studies are, showing that actually the views of the pet guardian, and in fact the dietary choice that they're choosing to feed their animal, seems to have no effect on a range of indicators of health of the animal.
And that's fascinating.
That's good news. Yeah, there seems to be minimal or no effect.
Now, is that no effect because you have an independent evaluator of it, so say a veterinarian looking at it, or is it no effect on their own personal evaluation of their pet?
Yep. The studies that I have done have asked people for their personal opinions, but have also asked for the veterinary assessments of those animals. And we've only used veterinary assessments where animals have been seen by a vet recently, and where there's certainty about what those assessments are. And that's a large subgroup of our total sample, but it's not all of the animals. So we've got those two sources of data. We've then gone ahead and looked at the prevalence of the most common health disorders and the overall assessment of illness or health based not on the people's personal opinion, but based actually on the veterinary assessments.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done that. There are many more studies in this field now. There are now 11 studies of health outcomes in dogs maintained on vegan or vegetarian diets. Some of those studies have gone further, and they've taken blood samples and utilised veterinary clinical examinations to study the health of animals, which is more than what we've done. We've used reported data only, and that's great. The trouble with those studies is, as I said before, they're much more expensive to conduct, and so inevitably the numbers of animals are not 2,500, which is what we have in our dog study. They're 20 or 40 if we're lucky. So now in this field, as I say, there's actually 10 studies showing equivalent or superior health outcomes in dogs maintained on vegan or vegetarian diets, and one study showing worse health outcomes. Of those studies, we've got a mix. We've got really large scale ones with big numbers, which use reported data and opinions, and then we've got much smaller studies using veterinary clinical examinations and blood samples. The ideal would be to combine those two approaches, having the most rigorous forms of data, clinical examinations, blood samples, and ideally prospective randomized controlled studies, but with numbers large enough to get reliable data about subgroups, such as the number of animals that suffer from specific healthcare problems, and then see if there are differences between the dietary groups. Unfortunately, no one's ever had the funding that such a study of that kind would require, because it would be very, very expensive indeed. However, what I can say is, with the studies that do exist so far, we already have an evidence base stronger than that which exists to support many other generally accepted dietary choices and other veterinary healthcare interventions. The evidence base now is stronger already. Already we have 11 studies in dogs and we've got 3 in cats. So it's, if we want to have a consistent, rational position, we should be willing to accept these diets, not on the basis that the evidence is perfect, because it rarely is anywhere, but on the basis that the evidence is already stronger than that which supports many other generally accepted diets and indeed preventative healthcare measures.
No, I understand. And I think in general, from a nutritionist perspective, this foundation that what pets need are nutrients and not ingredients, it suddenly kind of removes this. So you start talking about quality of ingredient and digestibility and amino acid profile and health benefits associated with processing and all the things that we all talk about, right? We all are very interested in. And
Yeah.
it's certainly a space where I think people come to it, and this is, you can tell my concern. I think come to it with a perspective that I have for non-nutritional reasons. I have a very strong interest in, like you said, maybe in a bones and raw food diet, or maybe a vegan diet, or something that really isn't a nutritional base. And then now we're looking for, but is it safe? Is it okay? And you're telling me you have a lot of data to show I can provide foods, or I can observe foods that people find to be safe. And assumably regulatory agencies are interested in that as well, and they're putting their general in the U.S. we have a complete and balanced nutrition. I'm not sure what FDF uses, but they use that same kind of statement to say, yes, we know this
Yep.
food will maintain health and provide for reproductive performance, and that maybe not optimum, but at least minimal health. Is that kind of, is that how you're seeing it, or am I missing something here?
No, I agree. I mean, look, there's kind of two ways you can look at this. One is you can look at um, are the necessary nutrients being included in the diet? Are the nutrients of good quality? Are they being preserved during production? And then the second way is to say, well, let's look at the animals and look at the health outcomes on the animal. And really, the gold standard, I think, is whatever health outcomes on the animal, because that's ultimately what
Oh
what
yeah.
we're getting at. Is the diet going to achieve good health outcomes or not? And in a sense, it almost doesn't matter about the first part, so long as we're achieving the second part, so long as we're achieving good health outcomes in the animal. So, I've done both to a degree. I'm not a nutritional biochemist, but I have done another study in 2021. We published this, looking at all the steps during manufacturing to see what the companies were doing to try to ensure nutritional soundness and good quality of the diets, and seeing if there were differences between the vegan pet foods and the meat-based pet foods. And we looked in great detail at every step from initial formulation of the diet to meet the guidelines of the regulatory authorities, and steps taken to preserve the quality of ingredients and the quality of your diet, and supplementation and shipping and transport protocols to preserve quality of diets, and additives, and monitoring of degradation of nutrients over time. Looked at all of that, and we found that across the board, most of the companies were doing things fairly well. The ones producing the vegan diets had a slight advantage, and we thought maybe that's because the diets are newer and more controversial, and they're going the extra mile to try to ensure their diets are nutritionally sound through supplementation. So I've done that. Mostly what I've done, though, is studies looking at actual health outcomes in the animals when they're maintained on the different diets. And as I say, some other researchers have been doing the same thing, and we now have 11 studies in dogs and 3 in cats, most of which have been published just in the last 3 years. There's been a sudden, rapid rate of increase of research in this field recently.
Let's see what else. I really wanted to talk to you about the ideas that sort of permeate in your groups. You've worked with a lot of different groups. What do you find as someone you really want to work with it that makes for a good productive team member and an individual that you think either you want to be on the team with or lead a team that they're on?
I think when you're working in teams, good communication and interpersonal skills are really important. Some people are very expert in their particular area, but if they can't communicate and they don't have good interpersonal skills, then they're just going to be difficult to work with. Beyond that, I would say professionalism and reliability are crucial. I would much rather have a colleague who is professional and reliable than a colleague who shares the same values, who is passionately committed to the same values. Uh, so I think more important is that people are professional and reliable.
No, that's interesting. Well, as you look out at the career, you talked about this really explosive growth of this area of interest, and as people are very interested in these foods, if I'm a student, is it a good opportunity to try and find a university working in this area, or what would you recommend?
This field of vegan pet food is extremely exciting, both commercially, there are new pet food companies piling into this space, but also very exciting from a research perspective. There's been an exponential growth in research in this area. Nearly all of the studies of health outcomes have been published just in the last 3 years, and more are coming. And we've had studies looking at behavioural outcomes as well. So there's been a huge explosion of interest in this area, and it's been driven by sort of some mega trends. So these sorts of factors are increasingly important to pet guardians when they're choosing pet food. I'd say we're basically seeing the emergence of the start of a new disruptive pet food industry and a very exciting research space. And it's definitely one to watch. There are other products coming on stream. There is cell-based meat products for people and also for cats and dogs at an early stage of development. There are products based on yeast, fungi, algae, but by far the most developed are vegan pet food products. The vegan dog food market is already worth many billions of dollars each year and is expected to nearly double within about 10 years. So, yes, if people want to get involved in really exciting research, or indeed if people are coming at this from a business perspective, if they are interested in those trends as well, then this is certainly an area to get involved in.
I think it's pretty exciting, and I love the idea that from a scientific perspective that what we really need are ingredients that provide the nutrients that manifest these health outcomes you're speaking of, and of course there's all of the issues about how I feel about the food I eat and the food I'm having and what's national, international, worldwide spectrum. That enters into people's lives for sure.
ProAmpac, your companion in pet packaging. Visit pets.proampac.com to explore our innovative sustainable solutions, such as our QuadFlex recyclable flat bottom bags, ProDura polywoven bags, ProEvo recyclable paper bags with grease resistance, and our ProActive recyclable film and pouches that run at optimum speeds on your filling equipment. Elevate your wet food, treats, and kibble brand by utilizing packaging that safeguards and preserves product freshness. Trust ProAmpac for packaging that cares for your pets and the planet. pets.proampac.com.
Someone is looking at this, and you talked about some of your research. What's the best way for that individual to go find that? Is it search for Dr. Andrew Knight and look for those PLOS articles, or is there a manuscript?
I have a website where I try to collate this research. So it's called sustainablepetfood.info. And it has tabs at the top. If you click on health, you'll get all the dog studies, a short summary, and a link through to the full text, or for cats, or for behavior, or for environmental sustainability. So yeah, sustainablepetfood.info is an easy way to reach most of the studies. I also have a personal website, andrewknight.info, where I have articles, and if you look at the pet food studies, you might see some additional studies there, but those would be the two places to look.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed our chat, and I'm sure people will find it interesting. Tell us one more time the website that you stated, just for the people.
The studies that I mentioned can generally be found at the website sustainablepetfood.info.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks again for taking time and having our discussion today. I look forward to reading about that and hearing more as this area increases.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.